Hi, my name is Abhi from Solvation. I'm here to talk about the data map. So what is a data map? A data map is a repository or an inventory of all your data sources. So think applications, systems, anything that stores data that belongs to you on your customers, employees, and your business processes. The second aspect of a data map is a business process. A business process is anything that describes a function performed by the business to execute a certain task. The third aspect of data map are your third-party vendors. So any company or entity that's providing services to you or a product to you is a vendor. The collection of these three are called records. These records are then made part of a data map. A data map can be visualized with an analogy of a board. So if you visualize a board which has multiple pins on it and strings or thread connecting those pins or a network, that is a data map. Each pin on that board is either a data source or a vendor. The common aspect between a data source and a vendor is that they could potentially store data and process data. Data could be stored for a longer duration or indefinitely, or data could just be a pass-through. Either way, think of a middleware. So a middleware system does not necessarily store information for a long period, but it collects information from one data source and moves it to another data source or to another vendor. Keeping that in mind, these are your pins. The thread or the string that's connecting those pins together are your processes. These are the reasons why data is being moved from a data source to a vendor or from a data source to another data source. So think payroll processing. Payroll processing will take information from your HRIS system, your HR information system, and it'll move it to your payroll processing system. Then your payroll processing system might send it to your payment vendor or your bank or another processing company. These lines that are connecting are all related to your processes. And the connections are being made between the pins on the board, which are nothing but your data sources and your vendors. Why does an organization need a data map? If I were to give a very simple analogy, a data map is very similar to a trust. When somebody has to create a trust, they have to take an inventory of all their assets, everything that belongs to them, and then they have to log it all in and fund the trust. That's exactly what a data map is. What that allows you to do then is whenever you're getting into new assets or you're expanding your portfolio, whatever the case might be, you go ahead and update your trust. Now, every time you're making such decisions, you're also keeping the trust in mind. Similarly, when you create a data map, you know that the map has to be kept current. So if there's a change to your asset, your processes, or your vendors, you're immediately updating your data map. Once you build a data map, and for you to build a trust, you're going to need to have some professional help to be able to get the trust built. But once it's up and running, it just becomes a process for you to be able to keep it current, and you don't necessarily need to rely that heavily on a professional. This is exactly what happens with the data map. Once your initial data map is built, then it's a process that you've baked into your day-to-day operations that allows your data map to stay current. Another key aspect behind why you're building a data map is beyond just having an inventory. What you're really looking for is you're looking to identify privacy and security risks. Now, these risks can be identified by asking specific questions, which will then capture that information against attributes. If you're using a governance platform, that platform will also allow you to be able to generate risks automatically based on set criteria. If that platform offers you a risk library, then you can have predefined risks with predefined treatment plans, even controls associated with those risks. So that's another key driver for the data map is you're trying to get a good handle of what your risk profile is across the entire organization, across each and every single record that is part of the organization. What does the data map comprise of? We've already talked about an inventory of your data sources, your processes, and your vendors. Outside of the inventory in itself, what you're seeking to find out about each of these records, an attribute could be anything from a name to what kind of data is stored, who the data is shared with, how long is the data retained, why the data is shared, what is the legal basis for collection, is consent collected, is notice presented. These are all your attributes. Each record, each data source or process or vendor will have its own set of attributes. The beauty is these attributes are configurable. You should be able to work with any number of attributes that you need that are specific to your organization. Once you've defined these attributes, the only way that you're going to be able to collect information on these attributes is through running assessments. Now, this could be done through one-on-one meetings. Somebody could have a conversation with the business owner or the IT owner or the primary vendor contact to find out what the information against those attributes are. But another better way to do it is for you to be able to use the privacy governance platform, which will then allow you to build assessments. Assessments can then be sent to business owners, IT owners, and the vendor contacts for you to be able to collect that information. So keeping that in mind, an assessment is nothing but a window or a channel or a medium through which information about that particular record is received into its attributes, which can then be stored, and then you can build your risks off of them, you can build reports out of that, and you can also build any other follow-up actions that are needed for those specific records. How do you go about building a data map? There are 5 key steps to keep in mind. Number 1, identify your key processes, data stores, or data sources, and your vendors. What are these? These are records that you feel might have the highest potential risk associated with privacy or security. Number 2, identify the owners. These are the people who can tell you about these records that you have identified as key records. Number 3, run the assessments. Collect that information about these records based on the attributes that you've defined. Number 4, manage the risk. You're collecting this information, running these assessments only to identify risk. But once the risk has been identified, you need to mitigate that risk and manage it going forward. And number 5, you will identify related records that interact with the current record that is being assessed. These related records then go feed back into your data map backlog, which can then be used to iterate through this whole process again several times over to be able to build that whole data map for the organization. How do you identify your key processes, systems, and vendors? Think of some of these key aspects that generate risk within your organization related to either privacy or security. Number 1, do they collect highly sensitive information or even personal information? What is the storage mechanism? Is it being stored in-house? Is it being stored with a vendor? Is the data being collected with proper notice or consent? Or are you concerned that proper consent and notice have not been provided? Is the data being used in AI? Is the data being shared with vendors? What is the volume of data? Who does data belong to? Does it belong to customers, employees? Is data being retained for a longer duration? These are some key aspects that you keep in mind. So when you think of trying to start your data map, you have to start them with these key processes, data sources, and vendors. And once you have that initial list, you start running your assessments based on them. Now that you've identified your key processes, data sources, and vendors, the next step is to identify the owners. Now this is not as easy as it sounds. While there are owners for IT systems and processes, finding them might take a little work. You usually have to start on the top and work your way down to the person or persons who might have the best information available on these particular records. Now, that process starts with communication. You first have to have communication going out to the larger audience, informing them that a data map is being built. And this process requires their support. Then it's easy for you to start working across those key processes because at the very least, you'll at least know which organization that data source, process, or vendor belongs to. And once you identify that through email communication or a few meetings, you should then be able to identify owners that belong to those specific records that you would like to then run assessments on. Now it's time to run your assessments. For each of those key processes, data sources, and vendors, you want to kick off an assessment. Typically, what is required is you will need to sit down with the business owner or the IT owner to explain to them what this process is. While communication might have gone out from senior leadership and from the privacy office or the security team, they will still need to understand the specifics of the assessment, the anatomy of an assessment, what happens, what is my role, what happens after I submit. Once that overview has been provided, then they could either choose to partner with you in a working session to complete that assessment, or they might choose to be able to do it offline and then reach out to you in an offline manner or through emails to be able to clarify some questions. But our best practices have always been to sit down with that individual and offer to have a working session with them. There are 2 types of respondents. One that says, hey, I need help. I won't be able to go through this myself. Block time on my calendar. Let's get it done. I will get it done by then. And if they have questions, they will reach out to you proactively and they will get their questions answered. Now, once this is done, the assessments will then get filled up. Once the assessments are done, you have to review it to see if it's complete, to see if it makes sense, if the questions hold together. And then you move on to the next stage, which is the aspects of identifying and managing your risk. You run the assessments and collect information on your processes, data sources, and vendors for the primary purpose of identifying risk. Yes, you also want to be able to build reports. You want to be able to take that data map and give it to your enterprise architecture team so that they understand the implications of what's happening. It's also useful in identifying your blast radius for incident management and breach response. But identifying risks is something which is inherent to the whole process of building a data map. Now, once a risk is identified by having triggers, if you're using a governance platform, or if not, you yourself are going to review the assessment and you're going to say, this is a risk, and you start flagging risks. Once the risks have been flagged, if you have defined your risks in a risk library and have already defined your treatment plan with controls, you can then move forward to evaluate the risk, assign the risk to the risk owner, publish the treatment plan to them, and then follow up towards closure of that particular risk. Now, once this risk is done, typically what happens is anytime you're dealing with vendors especially, these risks will then dictate what your contractual terms are going to be. It will also dictate what your data processing item looks like. These contractual terms are absolutely essential. You might have noticed recently some companies got fined for not having proper contractual terms. That's because they did not understand the level of risk, and hence there were no clauses to be able to mitigate that risk. But that said, risk management is an absolutely critical part of building the data map. We are now at step number 5 of building a data map, and that is identifying related records. What is a related record? As mentioned earlier, thinking about the board with the pins and thread connecting the pins, that data map of yours tells you that a record could be connected to one or more other records. Now, when that happens, you're collecting that information through your assessments. For instance, you're asking, where does the data come? How is the data collected? Is it flowing in from an upstream source? Where is it stored? Where does it go from there? Are other processes related to this process? Sometimes the question is, are vendors involved in this process? If so, who are those vendors? As you fill in these assessments and you start collecting these completed assessments, you start building what's called a data map backlog. And that backlog is nothing but a list of records that you know are part of your system or part of your map, but you have not assessed them as yet. Then you start prioritizing your backlog and you start that whole process of identifying owners, running the assessment, managing the risk, identifying further related records. And this process of building a data map can take a while. It could take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. But that said, once this rhythm of data mapping has been generated, it not only helps you build the map as a whole, but in that process, you are actually educating the entire organization on the key aspects of security and privacy just by the nature of questions being asked. Once they are asked a question, are you presenting notice? They'll say, what's notice? You say, well, you have to tell them that you're collecting their information and here's why and how long we are storing the information. And if they wanted to be able to exercise their rights, here's a way to exercise their rights. This information is not common knowledge to people even within the organization. Another case is you might be asking the IT owner, how long do you store the data? Which record type is it? And they'll be like, what does that mean? It's an entity that is part of your retention schedule. So what's a retention schedule? So in this process, as you keep explaining these different aspects of security, privacy, and just general data governance, the organization's awareness and maturity is also rising along the way. And in the end, you end up with a data map that you can definitely use to be able to strengthen your privacy program and your overall information governance.